with us. I sometimes teach, I sometimes speak on Sundays, and often I clean the restrooms. So I'm a general ombudsman, but we are a spiritual community that is inclusive and teaches a philosophical stance that all of us are created equally, that we are a part of the one, and it is our responsibility, our spiritual, our social, our civic opportunity to do everything within our power to create and to uphold that ideal that all are created equal. And out of that mission and that vision of our center and our people, this is a step into providing forums in order to educate ourselves and to begin to make a greater name also for Spiritual Living Center of Atlanta in Atlanta and points beyond. So therefore, we are going to be live streaming this. So we have quite a following in social media, and that means that we are not bound by the Atlanta people or Atlanta traffic, but now we are opened up to a wider swath of individuals who are going to be joining with us. So welcome. One of the things that we also do, if you are new to us, is we allow ourselves to become centered. And tonight, the only way I want to ask you to do that is perhaps engage in some intentionality. And one of those intentionalities is to uncross your legs and arms and to sit and to imagine that your body is in this receptive mode. And I'm just going to state and offer an intention, and that is that in this place this evening, what is experienced is a high level of consciousness, an invitation to solution, an opportunity for creativity and to education to flow freely from all involved, realizing that what happens here affects and ripples out to many. And we are proud to be a willing vessel for that creativity, for that genius, for that connection to unfold. And with that, we allow it to be so. And together we say, and so it is. So again, thank you. I have a real special treat. I want to read you a story real quickly, because today is there are always many anniversaries, but today is an anniversary that perhaps you're not aware of. In 1969, 1 year after the passage of the Fair Housing Act guaranteeing equal access to housing for all Americans, regardless of race, religion, or national origin, there was a couple in Washington, D.C., married with 2 boys, who decided to move to New Jersey. While searching for homes, they encountered a practice called real estate steering, where black couples were steered away from certain neighborhoods. The couple grew frustrated, realizing that they were being led away from white neighborhoods. So they sought the help of the Fair Housing Council, which set up an elaborate sting operation where this black couple would look at a house, be told it wasn't for sale, and then a white couple would follow and find out that the house was, in fact, still on the market. Eventually, this couple found a house in a small New Jersey town that they loved, but were told that the house wasn't for sale. They arranged for a white couple to follow them, and lo and behold, the house was, in fact, still for sale. The white couple put a bid on the house, and on the day of the closing, instead of the white couple showing up, the gentleman from the black couple appeared with a volunteer lawyer. The real estate agent became so angry that he punched the lawyer and sicked a dog on the couple. Yet the law was on their side. The Fair Housing Act gave this man and his family rights that were not there just 1 year prior. And eventually the black couple and their 2 kids moved into that home in New Jersey. That was 1969, the year that this person was born, and that couple were his parents, Carolyn and Carrie Booker. So I'm talking about Cory Booker, the U.S. Senator from New Jersey. He says, that's the origin of my story. This legislation empowered my family to move into the home of their dreams in an all-white neighborhood with incredibly good schools and a great community that gave me my foundation to continue to great colleges and one day to serve as a U.S. Senator. and this is today. On today's 50th anniversary of the Fair Housing Act, I want to recognize the heroic activism of those who fought for this landmark bill that has helped millions of Americans like my family. We all must continue the struggle for justice to ensure that all Americans have equal access to the housing of their choice. So when I read that today, I sent a message to U.S. Senator Cory Booker from Spiritual Living Center of Atlanta, letting him know about this forum and thanking him with deep gratitude for sharing this story, and he wrote us back. And Cory Booker's message is deep gratitude back to you for your feedback and for your activism. Please let all in Atlanta know my appreciation for hosting your gathering. Senator Cory Booker. Yes. And so tonight, this is birthed from many ideas, but one is our monthly theme. Here at Spiritual Living Center of Atlanta, we focus on a theme throughout the calendar year, and April's is Conjuring Justice. And the word conjuring was deliberately chosen because to conjure means to bring forth, to usher in. And we realize more and more in today's world that it is our responsibility individually and collectively to do everything that we can to conjure the opportunity for justice, the purity of that justice to be available to all. And so in my stalling, I will read the bios very slowly with great fervor and fanfare. What was awesome was that right towards the end, we were able to secure someone that I actually look up to and admire greatly. This young man had performed for us in our community a while ago, and I never quite was able to express to him my deep admiration for his courage and his creativity, and to his parents for allowing and nurturing and fostering the environment for him to be able to find himself. And so our first panelist that I want to introduce to you this evening is Royce Mann. He's a 16-year-old activist, poet, and high school student. Since videos of his poetry went viral in 2016, Royce has had the opportunity to perform and speak around the country. Along with his passion for poetry, Royce has become increasingly involved in Georgia politics and activism, and his recent work has included being one of the lead organizers for the March for Our Lives Atlanta and Town Hall for Our Lives Georgia. Please welcome to the panel our first guest, Royce Mann. And Royce, you're going to sit on the end there. Our next panelist is a part of our national, or I should say our global organization, which is called Centers for Spiritual Living, and we are across the globe. He is a colleague of mine. He serves now in a new capacity here at SLCA on our Spiritual Wisdom Council. His name is Reverend Dr. David Alexander, and he lives in Lake Oswego. Did I pronounce it right this time? Oregon. He continues to serve there as a senior minister of New Thought Center for Spiritual Living. He is, and I can testify to this, a social justice activist. Dr. David has worked at at-risk youth and has served on the board of directors for the Community of Welcoming Congregations. He also serves on the governing board of the Association for Global New Thought, alongside other internationally recognized spiritual leaders. Please welcome, and you're going to sit on this end, Reverend Dr. David Alexander. Next is attorney Maciel Silva Tadeo. Did I pronounce that right? Yay. And she is a partner and an owner at the Tadeo and Silva law firm. She specializes in removal, deportation, defense, family immigration, and hardship waivers. She was born in the Dominican Republic. She personally recognizes the challenges of our immigration laws. She graduated from Emory University School of Law and Georgia State University. She is a member of the State Bar of Georgia, the American Immigration Lawyers Association, and the Georgia Hispanic Bar Association. Please welcome attorney Maciel, and will you sit next to Royce. Thank you.
Right here?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Say hello. Say hello. You wave on the other side of the table. There you go. Notice I'm stretching creatively. Next is Munir Megjani, who is the co-founder and executive director of HOPE. Just hope in general, all hope globally. He executive manages all hope for all of creation. HOPE is the acronym that stands for Helping Organizations and People Everywhere, an Atlanta-based nonprofit which creates space for diverse young professionals to come together, learn, and make connections to put their altruism into action. And that's only one of many things that this man does. Please welcome Munir Megjani. And if you would sit next to Maciel, no offense or anything right here, but oh, okay. We're going to do, yes, there you go. And then this will be reserved for Park Cannon. She is the youngest member of the Georgia House of Representatives, representing Midtown, Downtown, and Southwest Atlanta. At the 2016 Democratic National Convention in Philadelphia, Representative Cannon said, "We need to trust black women and will continue to stand up for LGBTQ and minority visibility in the South." Park serves on the executive committee of the Georgia Legislative Black Caucus, as well as the co-chair of communications. And when she walks in, we will all turn towards her and we will give her a round of applause. So go ahead and you can do that pre-arrival. And because I have a mad crush on Anderson Cooper, I've always wanted to play Anderson Cooper as moderator. And so this is about the closest thing I'll get to being able to pretend I am on CNN. What I would like to do is give you a few minutes to prepare your opening remarks or to greet and to say hello and perhaps even share what your intention is and your passion around social justice. Dr. David Alexander, can we start with you?
Sure. Good evening. Thanks everybody for coming out. I'm delighted to be serving on this panel with these amazing folks. You know, it's always an interesting conversation that I have the privilege, and I use that word intentionally, the privilege to find myself in being asked to speak on behalf of social justice issues and the advocacy work that I do. Because I do recognize my white male privilege, and in that I recognize the responsibility that I have anytime an opportunity like this comes my way to use it to leverage the conversation and lift up other voices and make room at the table for whoever's not represented. So I'm delighted that the panel is a very diverse and inclusive conversation. And part of that diversity and inclusivity is that white folks have to do their own education. They have to do their own work, their own self-advocacy, their own self-allyship to learn what the issues are, to learn about privilege, to learn about bias, to not go to diverse people and say, wow, I'm just waking up to this. Can you teach me about, like, no, go do your own work. You know, educate yourself, take responsibility, and then come to the table as a willing partner. So that's what I try to model in my own life, and then speak up in places that I can. First, to do my own work in education, and then to use the various positions that I have and opportunities to make sure that we're having an inclusive conversation about creating a world that works for all. So I'm really happy that I'm here and get to have that conversation with all of you tonight.
Munir?
Thank you. Hello, everyone. As Doctor said, it's an honor to be on this panel with individuals who are on here, and certainly individuals who I've looked up to for a really long time as well. You know, when you're on Twitter, you see mostly famous people who always have a tagline that says, you know, tweets are my own, or they're not. So these are thoughts of my own. So organizations that I'm here aren't necessarily being represented, but these are my personal beliefs from what I've learned through my culture, through my parents, through my religion, and kind of the embodiment of that through my life. It's important to me to look at change, and as you said, conjuring change from two perspectives. One is the empowerment of those that need. I think it's really important that individuals take change and their empowerment into their own hands. And sometimes we give them tools to do that, sometimes we step out of the way to do that, and sometimes you're just an echo for that. So that's a really important step for us to all keep in mind. And then the second one is the responsibility of the privileged. So once you realize that you are privileged, whether that may be because of your skin color, because of your bank account, because of your gender, or whatever that privilege may be, how can you use that privilege to leverage the voice of those that are in need and that are trying to make change? And I think when both of these things come together, that's kind of the perfect marriage of when we can create change. So I'm very excited to have this conversation with you and see how we can conjure change and solutions today.
Maciel?
Thank you so much for having me tonight. I'm very, very excited and very humbled by this opportunity to sit on this wonderful panel. I mean, you've said it all. One of the things that I loved about what Dr. Alt mentioned at the beginning was the message of conjuring justice. That's what we should all strive to do on our day-to-day basis. And coming from you know, an immigrant family, and having the opportunity and having the privilege to get an education that allows me to help those who at one point who are in a position where I was when I was younger, right? Being able to stay in this country, being able to be with their families, being able to fight with the system, with injustices in the system, to be where they belong, to be where they feel that they belong. So that's what I do on a day-to-day basis, and I'm very happy to be able to you know, explain to you guys what I do, and hopefully give you ideas and give you you know, what I know, so that then you can also help the immigrant community.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Cannon, welcome. Thank you for being with us. We're so excited that you're here. We voted you on the head of many committees while you were on your way, and it was unanimous, and so I hope that's not an imposition.
Amazing. I love being voluntold.
What we're doing is we're making our introductions and just saying why social justice is such a vital part to us personally. Would you like to say welcome and greet this crowd?
Yes, most certainly. I'd love to ground myself in gratefulness. Today has been a beautiful day. Had the opportunity to spend time with some of my favorite seniors, also to knock doors and spend time on the doorsteps and porches of some Southern women, and also opportunity to spend time with youth. And overwhelmingly, the conversations have been the need for intergenerational work. I truly believe that the Spirit is one of those things that connects us intergenerationally without us even noticing. And so as a third-generation member of a Baptist church who also believes that the Spirit lives in the hellos and the thank yous and the hugs, I just want to greet you in peace and thank you all for spending some time here. As it relates to a conversation around social justice, that has been the underpinning of my time at the Capitol. There are a number of individuals who even this past week refused to sign the 50 years commending of Dr. King's burial in Atlanta. And straight up just would tell me no to my face because they've been serving that long, or they were a part of the movements against Dr. King's work. And so it feels very timely to have a conversation on what social justice means in Atlanta and bringing us further beyond what seems to be polarizing. Thank you very much for having me. As the youngest member of the House and Senate, I once again greet you in peace.
Nice. Thank you so much. And Royce,
Yes.
say hello to us.
Thank you so much for having me, David, and for all of you for coming. I think what everyone else on the panel has said, I think they've expressed many of my thoughts. I think for myself, when I look at my work in social justice, I come from a very privileged point of view in the fact that I'm a young white male, cisgender, straight white male, who lives in a family, who has a home, who has food to put on the plate. I live in a neighborhood where I feel safe, but at the same time, I'm also a young person, and so I think a lot of my work personally is about balancing, as a few people touched on, using my privilege to pass the mic and try to do the work, but then I guess step out, and but then on the other side, I also want to claim my voice as a young person, knowing that youth don't often get a seat at the table, especially when it comes to making the decisions that affect us and others as well. And so for me, that's sort of what I try to do within my work right now, balancing that. Of course, when I'm older, that piece of being a young person won't be the case for too much longer. But yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm honored to be up here with the other panelists, and I can't wait to see where this discussion goes.
Thank you. So, Royce, I would like to start with you and note your March for Our Lives t-shirt. I do know that you were instrumental in helping organize that just happened recently. It's interesting within our greater Atlanta community that not all of the counties nurtured or fostered or championed teenagers in that pursuit to honor those 17 members who lost their lives in Florida. What was that like for you in order to not only organize that, but to see that those not too far from you were punished or repressed from being able to join in the same sentiment that you were?
Yeah, it was an incredibly empowering experience and educational experience to organize an event of that size along with other young people. I think there is a lot of magic in seeing within myself and with other young people as they realize and as we realize the impact that we can have, because I know that for myself, one of the things that's driven me to do more social justice work has been having experiences in my life that have shown me that I can have an impact and I can inspire people, whether it's through my poetry or other work that I've done. So overall, it was an incredible experience, and we're still going. That same group who organized the march is working on next steps. As for the youth who because of their schools, their families, whatever, weren't able to participate or weren't supported in their participation, I think it's really a shame, because when you look from an educational point of view, for sure, I think that I have no doubt in saying that walking out or marching or demonstrating, being civically engaged in some way like that is much more educational than any class time you would have missed.
Amen.
And so it really seems like it goes against what those in power in the education realm seem to be advocating for, which they say that they're trying to educate young folks to be, free-thinking, contributing members of society. Yet when we try to do that now, they don't let us. And so, I think there's a lot of irony in that. But at the same time, when you look at anything important that has been successful throughout our history, none of it has, been done to only applause or has been supported by everyone. And we oftentimes forget that, with the recent 50th anniversary of Dr. King's assassination. I've heard a lot of talk about how people these days like to remember him as a beloved figure when in his life, he was he was not so beloved that broadly, and so I think that it'll be the same with the youth who have been suppressed today. I think in 30, 50 years, people will be celebrating them, but I guess for myself, since I have been supported by my family and my school in the work that I do, it's sort of hard to imagine what that feels like and the will that it would take to keep on going when you don't get that support. But I'm so proud of the other young people who have kept going.
Thank you. Dr. Alexander, as someone with children living in the state of Oregon that perhaps doesn't have the same challenges that Georgia has, what would you say to someone like Royce, knowing that you have a son nearly the same age? What would you offer him with regards to a commitment to that era, to that generation, particularly around gun reform?
Well, I would say so. I have a 13-year-old, what I call my chosen son. It's my wife's first child, African American, and then my first son, my firstborn, is 16 months old. Was on Sunday was his birthday, and so and having that age disparity is really interesting because I'm always looking through the lens of my 13-year-old in the world that's waiting, this current world and paradigm that's waiting him, and then so much of the justice work that I do, doing it in hopes that it will make a difference and I can see a measurable change in the world that will receive my 16-month-old son when he's that age. So I'm always watching that, that timeline. What I can say is there's a lot of focus right now on the youth and the passion of the millennials. And I'm a Gen Xer, right? And so what I would say is keep doing what you're doing, keep walking, keep marching, keep walking out of school, keep raising your voice, and keep inviting us to play with you. The Gen Xers have a passion for these things too. We got lost we're lost a bit in our jobs and paying our mortgage and raising our kids or whatever right now, but you have multi-generations of support before you and behind you, and you're riding a wave of momentum that is going to change history, and we got your back, so keep going.
Is there anyone else on the panel who would like to comment about the gun reform situation or offer hope or solution or any perspective with regards to one of our millennials here? Anyone?
I just want to say how proud we all are of, I consider myself young, but the younger crowd, they have so much spirit, so much passion. They get out there and they make it happen. So thank you so much. You inspire us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maciel, I would like to move to some of our immigration issues, particularly here in the state of Georgia. Someone recently noted a statistic that said more than 80% of the cases that are coming up to be judged, that many of those are being directly deported, whereas in other states that percentage is not so high. Mm-hmm. Being an immigration lawyer here and facing that continuously day after day after day, how do you work in that environment and maintain some type of hope? And what do you see the current situation being?
Right, it's very difficult to keep the hope going, but it is true. Atlanta is one of the hardest. The Atlanta Immigration Court is one of the hardest. It only grants 2% asylum, where, New York courts and California courts grant, more than 50%. So it is extremely difficult to win cases like asylum, cancellation of removals, and those type of cases, especially now with the new administration, where now we don't only have to put forth, a great strong case, but we also have to deal with the politics and opposition from DHS at every point. So it is difficult, but we do our very best. There are different strategies that we come up with. We try to take the cases out of court so that USCIS, United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, can adjudicate them. We try to take them out of court as much as we can. But it is difficult, for sure.
And for those of us on the other side, what's the greatest thing that we can do as citizens to be able to help the situations, to help the immigrants?
The most important thing is keep being informed, know about what's going on, and vote. Vote for representatives, for people who are sympathetic to the immigrant cause, and who are just. All we need is fairness. All we need is a system that provides different avenues, that factors in important things like family ties, like humanitarian situations, like ill children. There's so many things that should be good basis for a person to be able to remain in the United States, and currently that's not the case. So as citizens, the best thing that we can do is be informed and exercise our right to vote.
And if we were looking at day-to-day sustainability, day-to-day offerings, particularly when you talk about the emotional disruption that takes place within a family, that must have some really profound repercussions, particularly if they have small children in public schools.
Absolutely.
That emotional disruption. What would you recommend that communities could do to provide these families that's a real tangible, useful tool for them to deal with this at this
Right.
juncture?
Lend a hand. We all know that family, right? That it's an immigrant family that whose cousin is in removal proceedings. A lot of them don't know how to find a good attorney. They don't know where to go for help for nonprofit organizations, legal organizations. There are a lot of pro-immigrant organizations that we can be part of, but I think just lending a hand to those people that we know and we see on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, what a grocery store, our neighbors, it doesn't matter. Just be there and be understanding, and offer, right, our help and our support, even if it's just emotional support. Some people just need a neighbor to look after their children for a couple of hours while they go see their immigration attorney because their husband is detained. So small help, small little help like that makes a huge difference.
And just by a show of hands, and people in the auditorium, how many of you are connected or friends with people who are immigrants that might be challenged at this time? Representative Cannon, any thoughts or perspectives on that immigration issue here?
Oh, certainly. This session was a perfect example of the continuation of our voices being amplified at the state capitol around issues of non-white people. Let's be honest, it's white men who have been serving. And so even to think that they would be challenged by being xenophobic has been something that we've had to say, yes, you will be challenged if you are xenophobic, period. You can't just have a piece of legislation like Senate Bill 452 that not only makes unfunded mandates of courts that do not currently have jurisdiction to decide someone's lawful status, but you also are making it very difficult for people to feel safe in their communities and actually ask for help. And if you're saying that you want people who are here to be legal and to join our community, you're not making it any easier when you are creating laws that say, even if you are just in a basic incident and someone wants to ask your lawful status, they would have to take that not just to that court, but actually give the information to federal agencies around immigration. It's been quite devastating to think that we would not have a voice. And as people have shared their voice this session, which was so, just magnificent, we've been sharing our voices in our own languages. And so I beg that people come to the Capitol and stop speaking English. It would make such a difference if you walked up to a rural legislator and spoke in your own language. As a person who speaks Spanish and Portuguese in my own clinic, and that is the only way that people are able to access reproductive health care, you can't flub a conversation, about reproductive health care in a different language, and you can't flub a conversation about immigration. And so when these legislators are challenged about the constitutionality and the actual things that they're trying to put on paper, we have been able to stop them from their horrendous efforts to tear families apart. And so I beg that we support the people in office right now that this has personally touched. We have 3 Latinos in office in the state capitol. One is Pedro Marin. The first Latina is Brenda Lopez, and our second Latina is Deborah Gonzalez. And this has been something that they have had to take on their plates fully. Brenda is an immigration attorney, but the others are in completely different fields and have had to take on, what has happened, because we don't have folks of Indian descent in the Capitol or other people of color organizations in the Capitol to speak to what happens. But thankfully, Munir and another group of people have brought a conversation about the Aga Khan to our Capitol, and that was even, revolutionary through the spirit world. So I am certainly hopeful that we will bring our advocacy to the state Capitol, and as you mentioned, to our school systems. They are the ones who can decide, if people can be law enforcers on their campuses and what kind of welcoming policies they have.
And one of the reasons why you are in the position that you are was because of your own personal story of obstruction, if you will, and racism. Would you let the audience know a little bit, if they're not familiar with that, how you came to, as you say, take on this role, this important and vital role?
Yes, speaking truth to power started the moment I left my family's home. We embarked on an opportunity for me to take some money to go to school and to study dance and to explore the things that I felt were important. And one of the first weeks that I got to my college campus, people were banging on my door, and I stood on the other side of the peephole and watched them bang on my door. And eventually they stopped. Once they stopped, because I would not come out and open the door, they had wrote the N-word just all over my door, had completely tarnished the things that were on the outside of my door. And as I had seen them through the peephole, took my own experience and said to the administration, this is what took place. This is what happened. I spoke with the Black Student Union. This is what happened. And they denied it. They said it was impossible. There's no way. This is 2010 or 2009 in California. There's no way this could happen. And now I'm still, hopeful that those individuals who did that, understand how damaging that was to me. I fell into a depression. I slept in a closet for like 2 weeks and felt as though it was impossible for me to come back from such violence that was unspeakable, and that no one believed even happened. And so if that could happen, to me, I assumed that it could happen to other members of our community who are, stripped of any dignity and any privilege just because of who they are. And as I brought my concerns back to the state of Georgia and tried to connect with nonprofits, I found a home. I found an ability to speak about what happened to me and how that affected me, and bring an asylum to some people who felt like, this is happening right now. What do I do? And so it's been a long road of mental health repair. For myself and for some of my family and community. We've gone so public, we've gone national, international with my story. And at the same time, Black men are being shot down in the streets. We say their name all the time, who they are, and we speak about their stories, but they're still experiencing state-sanctioned violence. And so it is absolutely current right now that we speak our stories. There are opportunities through nonprofits like StoryCorps and other organizations. Just take your grandmama, take your auntie, take your nephew, and go and record your story. It doesn't have to be in a specific pathway. Just get it out there, because I am sure that it is on trend with what is happening in our country, which is the complete teardown of people of color and marginalized folks' experience.
Thank you. Munir, I know that a lot of the work that you do has a sort of a mentor element to it. Is that correct?
Yeah.
With your organization? What's to you is the necessity of that level of mentorship to be able to have people look up and understand that there is some pathway of hope?
Yeah, I think there's two things. One of the organizations that I helped started is called Aroma, Activist Recruiting, Organizing, and Mentoring in Atlanta. And the goal of that was to look at how activism was done in the past and how can we bring that back. Activism in the past was very focused on an issue, and you kind of made a lot of noise about that, and you saw impact, right? Martin Luther King. Activism today, because of social media, has loud voices, but sometimes it gets lost because there's so many voices yelling all about the same thing. And so one of our goals was to connect activists, intergenerationally, as we talked about earlier, and said, okay, how can we help new activists in what they're doing? And so we started an organization to just get these groups of people together, and we saw the impact that the younger constituents were having almost immediately, learning from, oh, okay, this is another strategy that we can do, this is something else that we can try, but also giving them hope of, look at these individuals who've been through it, done that, and they've, been yelled at, they've gotten in trouble in the schools, but they survived and they're okay. So I think it gave a lot of hope to those people there. The other thing is, really kind of in the nonprofit civic organization world, we see these social and cultural barriers that are created, right? There's different ways that the generations want to do things. And a lot of times, you get involved in the nonprofit world with these high expectations of you're going to go change the world, and you realize that it's just a lot of paperwork, and it's like you're working corporate America, but supposedly it's doing something good that you don't really get to see. And so how do we overcome those things, right? And so how do we work with the generation who, in the next 10 years, they say the millennial generation is going to be, I think, billions of dollars of, wealthier, more access and more leadership. You see that in local politics, where you see all of these young individuals who are getting into roles of politicians and are really bringing down the age levels there. I do commercial real estate personally, and I see that in my world, right, where you see a lot of like grandparents working with their grandkids, and it's skipped this generation who kind of ended up in corporate America in their 9-to-5s, and so you're seeing this turn with our generation again of activists or people who are like, we're not okay with all this, right? Like, it was okay for a while, we're not believing the myth anymore, and that's beautiful, right? I moved to the United States when I was about 2 years old. So I learned English pretty early on. My parents are still very culturally, Indian, Pakistani, Muslim. But the worst thing that I had was before 9/11 was I would, get Abu jokes and get, taxi jokes and gas station jokes, right? And then 9/11 happened, and I went from being the ideal minority to being like, oh, this isn't that good. And got just what I call a sneak peek of the life of a colored person in the United States, right? And I was like, oh man, I thought I knew what it was like, and then 9/11 happened, and I was like, oh God, this is worse than I was expecting. And then what was worse about it was I started believing the myth. When I would go to the airport, and I'm sure you've heard the story of being patted down and like being the random selection, I was okay with it. And I would tell my friends, look, if Muslims are doing this, then let's just statistically look at it, right? And I then have an issue, and I would say, let's pat down all the Muslims. And then you realize that the facts that you're basing your stuff on are alternative facts, right? And you realize that this entire life that you've kind of dreamed up and said you're okay with isn't really okay because the base of where you're started isn't okay. And so I think a level of mentorship is always needed because sometimes you can get blinders and you can start seeing things in certain ways, and you need someone who says, let's take those off for a second. It's good to be focused, but let's look at what else is going on, and let's make sure that the core of where we're starting from is also real.
Awesome. And Royce, if you had your ideal mentor and the listening ear, what would be some of the questions that you would seek, or what would be some of the things that you would want answered for you? How about even on this panel?
Yeah, I would be honored to have anybody on this panel be my mentor. I don't know. I think that in my life, as I've had mentors, and I have a few people who I consider mentors now in my social justice work, I think that if anything, it's really just their presence and seeing someone who has really done what you want to do and is continuing to do, of course, what you want to continue to do. But when you're I think social justice especially, a lot of the work that you're doing, I think it can sometimes cause some, I guess, unsureness in yourself, not in what you're fighting for, but in the way, I guess, you're fighting for it. And so I think that it's really great to have people on that path who you respect, because when people who you respect say you're doing good work, what you're doing is going to actually have an impact, or are just there to support you in whatever way, I think that means way more than if 200 people online who you don't know are saying that. And so, yeah, as for questions I would ask them, I think, I guess things sort of along that line, sort of trying to get confirmation that like I'm doing this right, because a lot of the times, the work can be long and it's a while before I guess you see the impact, and so there can be days when you sort of start to lose that motivation, I guess, not because you're not passionate about the issue anymore, but because you just feel like what you're doing isn't actually going to have an impact. And so I think it's really awesome to have people who keep you on that path. And sort of going back to the point of youth who weren't supported in the walkouts or the march or whatever it is, and sort of broadening that to whatever work they want to do, even if it's not social justice related. I think in that case, having a mentor can, I would guess, could serve for some of that support that maybe you don't get other places that you should be getting it. And so as someone who does get the support from most of the places where I should be getting it, I guess I don't really know what that would feel like, but I still know that even besides my family, besides my school, when I have sort of that mentor figure, that adds sort of another layer of support that means something even more.
Great. I would like to throw out a hypothetical, and that is that when all of us professionally stand before systemic issues, that there is the sort of impulse to want to go in and to fight against that particular thing. And I use the word fight deliberately, meaning energetically what we're doing is we're trying to push back at that particular systemic issue. And I have heard visionaries explain that sometimes perhaps one of the greatest reframes is not to necessarily fight against that systemic issue, but to make sure and establish the vision and then walk into that issue with vision, understanding that sometimes that's the only sustainable energy that we could have. That if we rely solely on the reaction of fighting, then there is the possibility of burnout. And that all of our mission and all of our vision is so essential in order to have sustainability around these issues, that perhaps what might first do us good is to define what is the vision of what it is that we're aiming for. Representative Cannon, does that bring up anything for you?
Well, it certainly does. You know, when I decided to run for office, we actually made glasses, my campaign logo. We tested it. It says, looking out for you, forward thinking. And we got past that to my own personal way to connect with it, which was my vision, my outlook. Then we got towards the district and we said, what are our lenses? How do we walk through the world as people in District 58 in Midtown in Atlanta? So a conversation about how vision gets you past burnout, absolutely. When I had to reframe why I was feeling so frustrated with my colleagues, I had to reframe it as they were dimming my light, and they were doing it intentionally. I was, talking blue in the face about how we end homelessness in Atlanta, and had to realize I'm talking with the folks who created homelessness in Atlanta, but based on their policies. And so it wouldn't be possible to just walk in and fight those folks on that issue. Instead, I would have to think about creative strategies to push back on what they were doing. And one example has been around all of the inclement weather that we've had, over the span of Georgia, but specifically will take 5 years. We can all think about times when the weather was really intense, either hot or cold. And where is the Department of Natural Resources or the Emergency Management Agency around transient or homeless people at that time? We don't even have policies about it. So it wasn't necessarily that I needed to fight someone about, intentionally not giving someone service. They hadn't even thought about creating a policy that says when it is 26 degrees or below, or whatever degrees or below, we have to open a state warming shelter. And that helped me to kind of perk up my lens again, have it not be so foggy with how we push back through a lens of social justice. When you put social and justice together, sometimes they're actually opposite. Social is maybe something you see active. It's in the community. You can be social and come to someone's event or show up at a party. And justice, it feels unattainable. It feels like clouds. What are the pieces of it? It is dependent on who speaks to it. And so for us to actually bring social justice together, I would absolutely agree that we have to clean off our lens and think differently about our vision.
Yes. Maciel, I'm sure it must dim your light at times to have to work with the volume of people and the issue of immigration. How do you cultivate a vision for yourself and your work with regards to what you do?
Well, right now we have to deal with a lot of opposition everywhere we go, especially when we're in court. So we look at our clients and we give them strength and they give us strength, right? We look at the family unit and we just fight. We put forth the best possible case. Right now, the administration is so new, and it's coming to us with such strength that, you know, engaging in a positive conversation with DHS, it's becoming harder and harder. We hope that with time that will get better. Right now, we are, you know, looking at other strategies to perhaps, you know, being get the cases in court and make, you know, postpone the hearings, use the system to our advantage so that we can present these cases in a better political climate for our clients. At this point, we're looking for, you know, the best technical ways to really win these cases. At the end of the day, we're looking to keep these families together, and we will do it any way we can.
And can you also share too, what was it about this work that pulled at you? What
Absolutely. So I am from the Dominican Republic, and my family is an immigrant family. So we went through the whole process coming to the United States, and this country has given me so much, and I identify myself with the community and the struggles that they go through on a day-to-day basis, and how difficult the system can be for good people who want to stay here, who just want to work, and who want to, you know, provide a better future for their children. And I speak Spanish, and that's just my community. So of course it was a natural attraction.
Beautiful. Dr. Alexander, how about your take on vision versus fighting or pushing against?
You know, having a vision is critical in this work, because so much of the narrative of social justice paradigm is about fighting, and it's us and them. And what happens when we participate in an us and them narrative is, even if we're doing good works, because and we're talking to an audience here that understands what consciousness is, because we know how consciousness works. Even if you're doing a good deed, fighting for immigrant rights, fighting for Black Lives Matter, whatever the cause, marriage equality, whatever the issue of the day might be, if you're doing it in a narrative of us and them and winning and losing, then you're perpetuating the continuation of there being an us and a them. And somebody's got to win and somebody's got to lose. And so we have to, as spiritually awake people, we have to begin to change that narrative. And she gave great examples of how she's able to do that in the legislature. I'll give you another example of how I was able to do it in the body of people that I worked with in Oregon for marriage equality, community of welcoming congregations. I was at a faith leader meeting. We were talking about the upcoming, this was a number of years ago when marriage equality was up for the Oregon ballot, and we're collecting signatures to get it on the ballot. And the issue was all about the fight. We have to fight the conservatives. We have to fight the religious right. We have to raise enough money to defeat them. And I just kind of said, whoa, stop, wait a second. We're talking about, you know, for me, just to back up for a second and give some context, for me, justice is always about presencing our humanity, right? It's about what love, you know, Cornel West says justice is what love looks like in public. So it's about presencing our humanity. And that's why it was so critical for Dr. King to adopt the nonviolence principles from Gandhi, right? Because in the presence of your inhumane actions, we're just going to stand here, right? and not fight back, but we're just going to stand, we're going to let the whole world see. You know, that in the presence of your inhumane actions, we still have humanity. Now, what are you going to do with that? Cognitively, you have to wrestle, and our collective psyche as a nation had to reconcile and wrestle with that cognitive dissonance, that we were doing inhumane things to human beings. So with that kind of narrative shift, I had the conversation with the faith leaders, and I said, what we're talking about is presencing love, marriage equality. You know, first of all, you know, there's no such thing as gay marriage, right? It's just marriage, right. Okay? I mean, I could have a gay wedding. I mean, with my wife. You know, I mean, that's not, you know. So it's just marriage we're talking about. We're talking about the principle of love. And from a spiritual perspective, the principle of love has no opposite, right? It's a spiritual principle. It's an eternal reality. And so what came out of that conversation was, and we use it as a tagline in the campaign, that the principle of love cannot be defeated by the politics of hate. And that changed the conversation. So we sent people door to door, rather than saying, you know, will you sign this signature collection to get this on the ballot? Are you for or against? See, even that, right? Are you for or against marriage equality? Or sometimes the conversation was, are you for or against gay marriage? It's a terrible question, right? It's a terrible question. So instead, we shifted it and we sent people door to door, and we said, when they answer the door, ask them about relationship. Ask them if they're married. If they say yes, then ask them how long they've been married. And when they tell you that, ask them what they love about being married, or if they're engaged, or they want to be married, or if their parents were married, or their grandparents were married. Who's the couple that you know that's been married the longest? And what have you learned anything from them? And what's wonderful about that? And let them tell the story, right? Again, presencing our humanity. And then when they did that, then suddenly the conversation was filled with the principle of love. And they were talking most likely about a heterosexual couple, that it was either them or their parents or their grandparents, and they were presencing the value of that relationship. And then the turn came in the conversation, which was, let me tell you about Steve and Bobby. Steve and Bobby have been together for 30 years, and you know, or Jane and Susie, or whoever, you know, and they want the same thing. You know, that you just talked about, that your grandparents have, or that you have. So we're presencing our humanity in justice conversations, and we're saying that our walks might be different. You know, your walk as a trans person, or your walk as a black woman, or your walk as a whatever it might be, your walk might be different and unique, and those are beautiful and should be honored and respected. But our aspirations and our desires are the same. Our aspirations for family, and to raise our kids, and to have a good education, and have a piece of land and a place to call our own, and retirement. And so for me, changing the narrative is always about the vision is about what kind of world do we want to create? What kind of world do we want to create? And we want to create a world in which everyone has the opportunity to step into their own aspirations. Right? A democracy has both a promise and a responsibility. The promise of a democracy is that it has a path for self-actualization. The responsibility of a democracy is that we have to ensure that everyone has access to that path. And that's about creating the vision.
Beautiful. Munir, how about you with regards to the vision piece?
Yeah. So I've always had a love for psychology, and one of the biggest changes you've seen in psychology in the late 2000s was this transfer from saying that we're intelligent human beings to we're emotional human beings, right? Mm-hmm. And you look at how even something as simple as advertising is done, they pull at your emotions, right? And so I always look at everything from that perspective, is if you're gonna have somebody change, how do we emotionally get them there, right? And I think, you know, you guys did the exact same thing with starting about love and then talking about sort of the issue. So I always first and foremost think about that, and then I think about how do we identify the problem that's at hand, right? And it's funny, even when I was writing my notes, I wrote expose, and that's such an aggressive word. Like, let's expose what's going on here, right? And right away, you're doing this clash. So you identify the problem, you dismantle the problem, and you really don't push, because the more you push psychologically, the more the person pushes back, right? And if you give the person the space to be wrong with humility, they're a lot more likely to accept and come over to your side, right? So I had a lot of problems at the office. I would say about 90% of my office are Trump supporters. Surprisingly great people, but Trump supporters. And I would go in there really aggressive, guns blazing of all the issues that I had, and we got nowhere. And then I realized, okay, let me try a different approach. And so I went in one day, and over lunch, I was like, you know, I really wish Obama would have done this differently. And that happened for a couple of days, and eventually they started to be like, yeah, you know, God, Trump's an idiot. And it was because I gave them the space, right? And I realized that the more aggressive I was, the more that, you know, every time I yelled at them about it, they added another Trump sticker on their car, right? But because I gave them the opportunity to still save face and come over, it's a lot easier. And it's difficult to do because my ego was like, you're the idiot who voted for him, you know? But I couldn't do that because they wouldn't have the right impact, right? And so when you create that space, you really create an energy for people to work together. The other thing for vision, I think, is so important, right? And I say this, and part of the reason that I got involved in the activism world is I've always said there's 3 things needed for change to happen: grassroots activism, nonprofit, civic organizations, communities, churches, and politics. And I've always been in kind of number 2. And number 1, to me, the activism was something that was interesting, but didn't really quite fulfill my soul because, yeah, I'm March for 15, let's do it. I agree, we should have livable wages. How do we get there, right? And so I would like for people, when you're fighting for something, to go in with a solution, right? So if you want something, if there's a change that we need, how do we get there? What's the win-win situation, right? Let's break down a payroll of a company and say, this is how we do it. Because when you provide solutions, people are more open to the change, because change is hard, right? But if you come in with solutions and you show, here's how we can do it, here's how you can save face, or here's how you can look amazing doing this, things happen a lot more. And without solution-based engagement, without justice, without solution-based activism, we're never going to be able to win and make change. Hope is going through a change right now. We've been alive for about 5 years, and you know, we decided, let's revamp, let's look at our mission, let's look at our vision. And it took a really long time to come up with a mission and vision and values. And after I was done with it, I started thinking, I wonder what the vision of my life is, right? We all think about this purpose, and it's really difficult, and it's supposed to be this grandiose thing of your life. But I found it a little bit easier to start thinking about the vision of your life, right? What would be missing from the world, from the community, from those families, if you didn't exist? What would be missing if your organizations didn't exist, if this community didn't exist, right? And it gives you a really interesting answer as to what your vision can be, right? And what your role in your community or in the world can be. So I always just encourage people to kind of ask those questions of themselves, of their organizations, and to think about it from that perspective.
Beautiful. Thank you. I wanted to carve out some time for the community who showed up this evening to be able to ask you some questions, but I do want to put one person on the spot and allow her to be the first. That is the president of our board here at the Spiritual Living Center of Atlanta. Her name is Karen Ratz. And Karen, I was wondering if you could, as a representation of this amazing, unprecedented community, offer anything or share or ask of anything of this panel.
I love when he does this stuff. How is it socially just that they call on you without asking you? That's what I would like to know. Yeah, I would like your take on, so our mission here is about reawakening people to their divine magnificence. And I think what we're doing as a spiritual community is that, you know, that can be a very personal awareness mission. And then how does that go into inspired action? And then how do those things intersect into something called what? Energetic flow, spiraling up, you know, what is that? So I think as a community, we're looking for, this philosophy can very much be about personal liberation and, you know, changing your own consciousness, changing your own mind. But what do you guys think about that inspired action, that energetic element? You know, how is it that as we rise up as self-actualizing individuals, we then can affect organizations, and those things can be reciprocal? And give me thoughts.
Anyone?
Well, I certainly think one of the conversations that I am having recently is people have questioned whether or not, as elected officials, we see our lives day to day, or we see them election to election. And so some people have said, you know, I haven't seen you before in my community, and now it's almost election season and I'm seeing you. Mm-hmm. And this is not a space for me to have that conversation about, well, you take a look at my calendar and you tell me where I've been. It's more of a space for me to say, thank you for the feedback. Please invite me someplace that you would like for our voices to speak together. Please help our community have a voice at this table. Please bring your children to the Capitol. Please come and advocate yourself. If voting feels like something that you are stepping away from and it's not something that is within your actualization of social justice because you have to vote for a candidate and you're not looking for one of those candidates and you don't believe in one of those candidates, you absolutely have the opportunity to write in people. And so I have been very public. I have voted for avocado before because it's green and it's healthy and it was on sale. Okay? That is important. That is very important to my own social justice philosophies. But bringing it forward, if you're voting for your school board member and you don't know who, vote for your favorite fourth grade teacher. What values did she bring forth that felt like that's something that you would want to actualize? How do we get past our beliefs to integrated voter engagement where it is not about the candidate, it's about the values in the system so that we actually are intrigued by voting? I will certainly say that as a millennial, there is this quote that millennials don't vote. Maybe you've heard this before. And so I've tried to unpack it my own self. Do we not vote? So I had to think back through who a millennial technically is. You came of age in the millennium around the year 2000, so maybe you were born between 80 and such because you were becoming 18 or 20. At this time now, in the 2018 era, maybe you're at the end of your 30s. That's not who they're talking about when they say millennials don't vote, the 38-year-old mama who's got kids. They're talking about that younger span between 18 and 25 or 26. And I can argue that millennials or people of that age range have not voted with as much vigor since the 80s. Think about what was happening in the 60s and 70s when we were getting the right to vote and people were joining this amazing ability to access power at the polls. And then as we got to the 80s and 90s and 2000s, it kind of went down. So this is not something that millennials can fix ourselves. It has to be an intergenerational work. And that is why I'm so thankful for my colleagues like Sam Park, who is grounded in the spirit. When people tell him as the first openly gay man elected to the state house that he's wrong and he's pushing for the wrong things, he just flips open his Bible and says, who are you to tell me not to love my neighbor? Am I not your neighbor and you don't love me? Why? How are we going to even have a conversation right now if morally we are opposing each other on some ground that we know universally is loving and is careful and believes that we are who we are because we were created in that image? So I hope that as millennials and as centennials, we start to understand that we don't have to be opposing towards faith communities, because in some contexts, we have walked out of our churches or our spiritual spaces to protest in the streets and do all these other things. And I do believe that there is some sort of unity and mentorship that is possible through a faithful social justice community.
Thank you. And so there are microphones on either side of the room. If you have a question that you would like to ask of one of the panelists, if it's a general question or if it's a specific question for anyone up here, I welcome you now to come to the microphone. Don't push one another. All right.
There we go.
Short, sorry. So I have a question general for the panel. This evening was kind of sprung on me, but I'm glad I came. So when I hear the phrase, or the word, social justice, I have a group of people, I think in your specific case, where like especially coworkers and family members, where like very die-hard Trump supporters and stuff, and when they hear social justice, they don't see it as a positive thing. And I personally feel that in some of their cases where they use the examples of people that label themselves as social justice warriors, that sometimes it could be justified as a negative thing. So I guess the question I'm trying to ask for you guys is what's your way of making that phrase, if you will, not something that's seen as a, oh my goodness, here comes these people are going to start screaming, or these people that want but have no answer, which you've kind of answered already, but I just wanted to get that out of my head and see what your guys' view on that was. How do you go from being seen as social justice to this is social justice and this is what it really is?
Yeah. I think that's a really good question, and you know, I think part of it is also obviously the media's role in this, right, where it makes these social justice people out to be these like savages who are going to come murder you for their cause, and doesn't make any sense at all. I think so. I always start with questions. I'm a very curious person, and so I would start with, you know, what is their specific issue? And you find that a lot of times they also don't have a basis. They just, you know, don't like it for some reason because, you know, news media told them not to. But if you start digging deeper and you say, okay, so what is the issue with social justice or these social justice warriors? What are they doing that you don't like, right? And then depending on that, you transition into, well, do you think there's more net good than there is bad? Do you think their intentions are good, right? Why do you think these people are risking their lives, taking time out of their day? Because nobody gets paid for this, right? And it's difficult. So why do you think it is that these individuals are doing that? And so getting to why, I would say, is always really important. Asking them their why of why this upsets them so much, and then seeing if they can sort of, through your questions, step into the shoes of a social justice activist and understand their why as well, and maybe that would help their understanding a little bit.
I would also say that, you know, for me, I could get rid of the term social justice and really replace it with this notion of, it's a spiritual term typically, but the essence for me of the work is it's about reestablishing our covenant with each other. Right? That spirit, the universe, God, whatever you want to call it, has a covenant with its creation. And that covenant is for that thing to be the best that, whatever it is. Right? For the bumblebee to be the best bumblebee, and the dolphin and the tree, and, you know, and the covenant with that creative power of the universe and its creation is that that thing has all the resources it needs to be that thing. And we are as humanity, are the carriers of that covenant for each other. So the covenant in terms of the human context is that we belong to each other. I belong to you, you belong to me. The problem is we tend to think in very small tribal ways. So we think that way, we feel that way about our family, about our children, about the people who look like us, who pray like us, who eat the same things we eat. We tend not to think that way about, you know, quote unquote, the other, whoever the other is. And so social justice is that social part of really expanding the circle and including whoever the other is. But one way to do that, in the way he was just reframing, you know, finding out what their values are, is like, well, who and what would you defend? You know, would you go to advocate, I'm trying not to use the word fight. Would you stand up for making sure that your children had food and clothes on their backs and a shelter over their head and a good education? You know, and if that was taken away from them unjustly, would you do something about it? Yeah, you probably would. That's what these folks are doing. They're standing up for, you know, the needs of others. So again, presencing humanity, bringing us back to, we all have the same aspirations and desires. We look different, we talk different, we have, you know, and those differences are beautiful, and we may not always understand them, but the aspiration and desire is the same thing.
Thank you. Another question?
We have a question over here.
Yes.
Good evening. Thank you all for your presence and what you bring forth to the table. And so I'm going to preface what I'm saying to kind of paint a picture of what my question is. So I'm sure most of you guys are old enough to remember when the U.S. Embassy was occupied, when Ayatollah Khomeini was president, I don't know if they called him president of Iran, and they released all of the African Americans, and they kept those who are white. And I think for two reasons. One was they didn't think that they had leverage because we had no power here. And then also because of our suffering, and they had some form of understanding of what that was. So I can only be me and walk in my shoes and understand my perspective. So my question to those who have lived outside of the United States, what is the view of this condition or this thing that's going on here with the various races and this and that, and how do they view the people who are probably the most oppressed, which would be African Americans? How does the rest of the world see what's going on? And you were saying that you thought you had an idea of what it meant to be a black man, but when, as a Muslim, you got put on the front lines, the firing lines, you're like, oh my God, it's worse than I could possibly have perceived. What are the views of people outside of the United States, and how do they see this, and how do they see us, is my question. Thank you all.
That's a hard question. So I've lived in the United States about since I was 2 years old. Culturally, I can give you a perspective from there. There's a desire in a lot of Asia, everywhere from China to India, to be light and to be white. There are ads that literally are called fair and beautiful, fair meaning lighter skinned. There are chemical products that you can use to become lighter. And a lot of that comes from socioeconomic times where if you were working class, you were out in the sun and you were darker. And so it was always nicer to be lighter because it meant you were rich. Parents, before their daughters were to be married, would try to get them as light as they could because it meant, oh, she didn't have to work hard. There is a wonderful organization that a dear friend of mine, Carlton Mackey, has started called Beautiful in Every Shade to really shine light on this in the African American community with the differences internally between, kind of light skin, caramel, black, and stuff like that. And when he was talking, I was like, we have the same stuff in India, And it was so funny to see how similar it was. It's changing, but it's slow. A lot of what you get abroad is through media that makes it there, right? And so you continue to see negative images of African Americans and poverty and all these things of, oh, they're not, they're helpless and stuff like that, right? So media frames a lot of what that is, kind of in the Asian community. I recently had the privilege of going to Cuba, and it was interesting there because they don't have so much media that comes out from the outside world. When I had, conversations with individuals there about, hey, how is racism here? And it was interesting because it didn't seem that big of an issue. And so they're facing more with kind of machismo and, LGBTQ rights and stuff like that. And I was like, well, what about black rights? And, is there a Black Lives Movement here? And they were like, not really, it's not a major need. And it was really interesting to kind of hear that, and shocking almost to not see this separation. So I think, you just have to be continuously careful where you get your sources from. And it's a long, hard battle. Every day, I grew up in a family who, because of all we knew, when a African American would walk into the gas station, right, and like the clerk would always be looking, oh, what's going on? And then just statistics, the more you chase after somebody, the more you're going to find them doing something wrong, right? And I'm sure it was an equal number of people doing it, but then you get facts that frame your mindset, right? Well, we've been robbed 10 times, and 9 out of those 10s were black. Well, were you looking at the other people who were also robbing you? Maybe not, right? And so, when you continuously start off with these myths that you take as facts because you don't know better, it's very, very dangerous at the assumptions you make from that. And so I think it's, everybody's responsibility to stand up and speak. and say something when you see something, right? And kind of point out those, the errors in somebody's way. And again, a compassionate way where they can save face and kind of understand what they've been doing that may not have been right.
Maciel, did you want to add anything to that question about those from other countries looking in?
Sure. I mean, I do travel to the Dominican Republic quite a bit. My parents still live there, and it's very similar to Cuba, where they're more focused, in classism, and it's more machismo, and that's really what they struggle with. They don't have a, Black Lives Matter movement. It's not that much of an issue. It's not, I don't think it's an issue. I mean, it could be a smaller issue, but it's not an issue that that is out there as much as it is here. And I think that's partly because of, the history of the countries, right?
And so what do your parents and others in the Dominican Republic think about America at this stage? With everything going on?
I mean,
a big question.
It's and my mother's here. It's a big question.
To be reserved for after.
To be reserved.
Okay. Yes.
Hi. First of all, thank you so much for being here. This is certainly a very stimulating evening. I probably won't get a lot of sleep tonight. But one of the things that concerns me, and I think that the topic, first of all, social justice can encompass so many things. These days we're used to talk about the walkouts and the marches and stuff, but it can be as simple or as complicated as a one-on-one conversation with a coworker or a neighbor or a family member. And I find that a lot of times the positions that I take, the people on the opposite side are being driven for the most part by fear. And, this goes for the gun movement. They're afraid we're going to take their guns. They're afraid the government's going to come, and I don't know what they think the government's going to do to them. But the men seem to be afraid that the women are going to take over and they're going to lose their positions of power. The straights are afraid that the gays are going to do God knows what, And I think that this fear is fed from a number of sources, one of the most obvious being the media, and of course, many of the politicians to serve their own purposes. And I think that that's something that I struggle with. How do we get beyond that? How do we get to the point where people aren't reactive out of fear and being driven by and making poor choices by being driven by fear? I don't know the answer, and I'm sure it seems like a very complex question to me. Maybe one of you has if you do this, then it's solved, But any kind of suggestions, even things we could do on a small basis and as it gathers mass, But I consider it a pretty serious problem and a pretty serious thing. I'm trying to watch my words because of the previous conversation. Something that we need to be mindful of and overcome, get beyond. So, any kind of ideas?
Well, that's a huge conversation. We could have a whole nother panel, I think, just on that, right? Because there's so many there's so many influences that drive, fear. Sometimes it's fear of loss of power or influence or control. Those tend to be, the main things. But I'm going to give kind of a sort of self-serving answer in this, but kind of wrap it around to a point. And I think one of the ways is by supporting spiritual centers like this. Because the thing, you know, when I was talking earlier about changing the narrative, the reason that I don't like using left and right paradigm in this conversation, but for the purposes of this, you know, the reason that the leftist social justice movements send out emails that use the narrative of we got to fight and we got to do this is because it raises money. Right? The paradigm of the fight raises a lot of money. So it's a good fundraiser. Fear is a good fundraiser. Most ministers are well theologically educated about the metaphors of hell and a whole bunch of things about the non-literal metaphorical aspects of the scriptures. They don't teach it because and sin is a really good motivator. You can build a lot of buildings, right? You're just telling the truth, right? So when we shift our values and shift where our money goes to supporting organizations that aren't driving a fear-based message but are driving a values-based message, then we slowly begin to add a drop into this other bucket and change the narrative over time. So I think that's one of the ways. And on a one-on-one level, I think it's just having compassion. When somebody's really coming from fear, I try to generate as much compassion as I can because I know that their irrational behavior is coming from a fear-based place. And fear is about, usually, again, needs, wants, control. Ultimately, it's about being heard, being seen, and being appreciated. And we have a spiritual starvation in our country, in our world, of being seen, heard, and appreciated. So if I can find a way, even if I don't agree with what they're saying or the political position they're taking, find a way to make sure that, as he was doing in his workplace, to see, hear, and appreciate them, then those defenses can begin to come down, because then we're getting some of those psychological needs that we all need and that we're all starving for.
One more question.
Doctor, do you mind if I...
a few more.
No, go for it.
You got it. Okay.
No, you.
Yeah, so I think that a lot of it goes back to sort of just basic human instincts and both recognizing people's humanity and also, you know, exposing your own humanity. And I think that in this age that they call sort of a more connected age, I would argue that we're actually more disconnected. In that we, you know, don't have as much face-to-face interaction. The way that we're getting our information isn't, you know, we're learning about people and groups of people from TV, from social media, not from those people. And so it's hard to recognize the humanity in stats. It's hard to recognize humanity in a little profile picture. And so I don't quite know how to fix that, because it looks like we'll sort of continue going in that direction to some extent. But I think that just on the personal level, making a real effort to, whenever you're talking with somebody, to Munir, I liked how you used that word expose. To expose yourself, to converse with humility, to be. I think that it's up to everyone to approach conversations without fear of their own opinions being shifted. I think that that we need to go into conversations being open to being convinced, and if you do that, the other person will reflect that and will also be open to being convinced. And so, yeah, I think it's really as simple as that. I think also there's somebody who I think of, I don't remember his name, but he's a man who I had read about and then got to see him speak at a panel a few months ago. And he's a black man who befriended like 100 or 200 KKK members and got them to leave the KKK. And I think that there's something as simple as the fact that just in being there with those people, he was disproving all of these thoughts
that they held and these assumptions that they had, and it's hard to make an argument based off of certain assumptions when the person sitting right in front of you is actively disproving those assumptions. And so I think that a lot of it goes back to sort of the beauty of human-to-human interaction.
Beautiful.
Now I wish I'd gone first. Dr. Durley, who was a civil rights activist and a big role model of mine, always talks about how life is a peak-to-peak movement. And he says you've got to take a P-E-E-K, to get to a peak, right? And it's P-E-A-K, right? And so you got to take a peak to get to another peak, right? And so life's peak-to-peak movement, right? And so kind of building on what Royce was saying, exposure is really important. Dialogue is really important. Another friend that I'd be remiss if I didn't tell you about is Jen Graham, who started a movement called Civic Dinners. And basically you can go online, you can look at conversations that you're interested in, host individuals, strangers from both sides of the aisle, if you will, from both sides of the conversation, and she does a phenomenal job of curating questions that really opens up dialogue and help people get to know each other, right? And it's these little things that really, really help you, right? And so you go to civic dinners and you can really kind of get these exposures, these conversations with other people from opposing viewpoints, right? And once you start really getting an insight as to why they think the way that they do, it also helps you to kind of bring them over to your side, if you will, right? Which is always a good thing, I would say. So look at organizations like that kind of help curate questions, and she does a great job of asking questions in very specific orders that, like I said earlier, let people save face if they do decide to move over, right? And make it very easy and compassionate for people to have those conversations. So, great.
Christy.
Okay. I have a comment and a question. To Royce, thank you for what you're doing. My daughter, we live in Cobb County, and we were one of 3 that were banned from protesting, and she and about 6 of her classmates stood up, walked out around administrators, and she was punished, and I was called, and I stood 1,000% behind her, and I thank you for giving her that inspiration and that platform to do that. And I applaud her for being brave enough, because I know I would have been scared, so yeah. And then to you, Maciel, I've been married to an immigrant for 12 years now, and we've had a lot of conversations about trying to get his papers. Unfortunately, he has a double crossing, and sorry, my voice is shaking, but I've witnessed hundreds of people paying people to marry them and getting visas in 4 months. And we've had a real marriage and a child, and have suffered a lot because he can't, like, employment and always hiding and running, and he went all the way to California to get a driver's license. Are these people aware of the illegal ways that people are getting papers, and what are they doing about that?
So yes, marriage fraud it's a huge problem in the system, in the immigration system. There are marriage fraud units who investigate these kind of issues, and many of them get caught, but many don't, right? And it is unfortunate for you and your husband, who have a loving, strong marriage of 12 years, and because of the same thing, the immigration laws, your husband's unable to get a green card. I mean, it's such a small immigration infraction. So just to let everyone know what she means by double crossing is when someone enters the United States unlawfully and accumulates at least a year of unlawful presence, and then leaves the United States to visit family. Most of my clients visit family, or someone in the family has passed away, so they have to leave, and then they come back unlawfully. Unfortunately, that triggers a bar that is permanent, that there's absolutely no waiver for it. You could be here for 20, 30 years, have a established, life and family, and you're just unable to adjust status. So, and that's one of the things that need to go away. They don't make any sense. So yes, to answer your question, there is a lot of resources that go into discovering marriage fraud. And again, many of them just go uncovered. I'm sorry that you're in that position.
As we wrap up, I want to invite you to have any closing remarks. Can we start with you, Representative Cannon? Anything you want to say to this community?
Certainly, thank you is the main thing. I just a few days ago woke up thanking God, and I have not been as connected to my church as I thought that I might have been since marriage equality came out. One of our pastors, stood up and said, all right, it's the law of the land, but it's not going to happen in this church. And I turned my back, and then I realized you make the change happen where the culture happens. So I had to come back and be a culture change maker, and have been so thankful that I have walked back towards my faith community, because it has brought me to other communities such as this. So thank you so much for having me first. Second, I will, of course, remind folks that the time is right now to start getting to know the people who are running for office. We are just about 2 weeks from the voter registration deadline. Early voting starts on the 30th of this month, and people will be able to finally cast their votes on May 22nd. After that, we start the cycle all over again as we walk towards November 6th, which are very important. That brings us the election for our new governor, a lot of statewide positions, a lot of local positions. This will carry us into our new census. This will carry us into our new maps for our districts and our new educational systems, technology, whether Amazon's coming. All of these things are contingent upon our engagement in the process over the next few months. So if you're feeling apathetic or frustrated, please plug in with myself, my team, organizations that do integrated voter engagement work to reinvigorate yourselves. And in the meantime, please remember, as Southerners, sometimes we become very regional. We've talked about international and national concerns here tonight. And as we walk back into our communities that at times may deny history or herstory or erase our stories, please continue to share those stories, be loud and proud, because we do have the opportunity to change the way that our world is going to look years down the road. I get so emotional every time I'm in a space with Royce, and we're not that much of a difference in age, but I am so thankful to the work that Royce and some of your team members are doing. They actually came and canvassed with me the other day and are dreaming how we move past apathy towards action. So thank you again.
Thank you. Beautiful. Royce, what would you like to say as a closing remark?
I would like to, I guess, just continue a little more on what I was saying before about, I think, dialogue. And I love that idea of social justice on the personal level, sort of that day-to-day social justice. And one thing that I would urge people here to do is to get in uncomfortable situations, and to, really make a point of talking with people who disagree with you, and also forming personal relationships with people who disagree with you, based on whatever shared humanity you can find, whatever you do have in common with them. And that's something that, out of all the social justice work that I do, that's probably something that one of the things I'm most proud of is when I become friends with somebody at school who I disagree with on a lot of issues, but am able to, joke around with them, play Foursquare with them, whatever it is, and then form a relationship with them, and through that relationship build the sort of trust that can support these tougher conversations. And then having those tougher conversations, and at some points having people convince me of things, and then at other points convincing other people of things. And another point I'd like to make that I guess ties in with that is one of the reasons that I guess I try to do that is that I think that's something that I'm able to do, I guess, more comfortably without I guess feeling as much personal pain when I'm talking to someone who may say things that would really hurt somebody else, whether it's somebody who says things that are homophobic. As someone who's straight, that doesn't affect me in ways that does someone who's not. And so I sort of see that as one of the roles that I have, and one of the forms of privilege that I have is that in those situations I won't feel whatever feelings of pain or whatever it is that people who are sort of targets of what those other people say would feel. And so I guess sort of tying that into a broader point is to work to really find, I guess, what your role in whatever movement you want to be a part of is, because I think I'm a firm believer in the fact that everyone can have a role in pretty much any movement, but I think we do need to recognize that those roles need to be different depending on the movement. And most recently with the March for Our Lives and some of these youth-led movements that we've seen, I've really loved seeing the adults who've supported us and provided us in ways that we really needed them to support us without overstepping that role. And I think that while I've seen a lot of people who have done that really well, I've also seen some people who haven't done that well. And so I guess those are the two things I would leave with you is, to focus on that everyday social justice. It may not be as glamorous as leading a march, but it's super important to have that human connection, and then also just be aware of the fact that we always need to make sure we're sort of in the most effective role that we personally, based on our own experiences, based on who we are, can be in whatever movement it is.
Thank you. Dr. Alexander?
My closing comments, I would say, particularly to the white folks in the audience and online, I would say the number one thing we need to remember, and it's for everyone, but our Caucasian folks tend to think that there's an opt-out button, that this is an optional conversation, right? That we can just do our spiritual work, we could just do our own spiritual magnificence, and that would be enough. And I buy the right things, and I have an electric car, and I shop at Whole Foods or whatever, and I eat avocados, and I'm doing my part. A number of years ago, I invited Bishop Yvette Flunder to a social justice piece that New Thought was doing, and I said, what is it that you want to say to a New Thought audience? And she said, I love the New Thought language. I love how you pray affirmatively, all these wonderful things. She said, but my advice to you is stop praying like there aren't lives on the line. Remember that every day there are lives on the line. Stop acting like that's an optional thing that you can ignore, right? There's no opt-out button on this. We're all connected together. We're all in this leaky boat together. And if this audience remembers my blackberry bush story from last summer, right? There was that moment that I got to, and the frustration, if you don't, for the panel, if you don't know, blackberries are an invasive species in Oregon, and I had bought this house, and they were, anyway, I don't have time to tell the whole story, but I was out there digging them as I bought the house, and getting rid of them, They kept coming back. I would come to a trip like this, be gone for 4 days, they'd just mushroom and go crazy. And so over and over and over again, and getting frustrated, and heard myself saying things like, I didn't plant these blackberry bushes. You know, the owner should have taken care of this. The previous owner before them, who was the first person who brought a blackberry bush to this yard? They're the ones responsible. I didn't do that, right? I'm the good person, right? And it's like, so sometimes we have that mentality that, well, I didn't vote that way. I didn't vote for him or her. I didn't support that policy. I didn't grow up thinking that. None of that matters. This is our land now. Right? This is, for me, for the house, it was like, this is my house now. This is my land now. I'm responsible for every single piece of root of blackberry bush that's going to come up. I'm responsible for digging it up and getting it out of the soil if I want to have the land that I want. We're responsible for whatever has happened before us. We're responsible for eradicating the systems of oppression and racism and discrimination and the policies and the systemic evils. Certainly doing our spiritual work is a huge part of it, but self-awareness is the booby prize of spiritual development. Let me say that again. Self-awareness is the booby prize of spiritual development. It's great to be self-aware, but that's not the end goal. The end goal is a world that works for everyone.
Maciel, closing remarks.
Closing remarks, very short. I just want to thank you for the opportunity to be in this wonderful panel. I have learned so much myself from the panelists. All I can say, this is obviously a group that's present, that's available, that's understanding. Continue doing what you're doing. This is a center. I want to be part of this group. Basically.
We will save you a chair.
So thank you so much, everyone, for coming and listening and
thank you.
Being here.
Thank
you. And Munir.
I was thinking about the first question that was asked to the panel about self-actualization. And it's a daunting task, and I'm not trying to take the Reverend's job here, but
it's okay.
I always tell people that while you're waiting for the burning bush to tell you what your purpose in life is, figure out what makes you happy, and what makes you happy that also promotes good in the world. Yeah. Because just as daunting as it can be to find your purpose in life, sometimes bringing good to the world can feel just as daunting as well. And it can feel like this task is just so much bigger than you. I've always lived by the mantra that I can't do all the service the world needs, but the world needs all the service I can do, right? And like Park Cannon will tell you, because she didn't do it, every dollar counts, right? Just like that, every small act counts. Everything that you can do to make the world better, every step, every time, every moment, every second that you can do that, because our collective power has the power to bring change. And never forget that, and always keep hope. Thank you again for having us today.
I'm going to ask our panel if they would to just stand and stay where you are, and for just 2 minutes we will allow group photos, and then be cognizant of their time and their needs, and then if you could just stay for a few minutes to let people greet you and thank you. We will do that too. Let's do one here, and then we'll go in front of the step and repeat in the alley. Photographers, line up. Please get our good side.